4 days before Christmas, my daughter phoned me and said 8 simple words that ripped apart everything I believed about fatherhood. "Dad, don't come. Michael says it's too complicated." I was standing in my kitchen in Denver, Colorado, phone pressed to my ear, snow drifting past the window, when it felt like something inside my chest split clean in two. I was 62 years old. I had devoted 37 years to raising her, walking her to school each morning, sitting in the passenger seat while she learned to drive, covering her college tuition, holding her during the father-daughter dance at her wedding, and now her husband had decided I was somehow too complicated to sit at their Christmas table. So on Christmas Eve, I found myself alone at a downtown steakhouse, surrounded by laughing families, clinking glasses, forcing down bites of food that might as well have been paper for all the taste it had. Halfway through dinner, a man roughly my age approached and asked if I'd care to join him and his wife. I agreed, assuming it was nothing more than seasonal generosity from a stranger. I couldn't have known that one small yes would alter the course of my life. 7 years later, my daughter stood in my living room, tears spilling freely, and only then did I grasp what that simple invitation had truly set in motion. "Thank you for being here and giving me your time. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd genuinely like to know." And just a brief note, parts of this story have been dramatized for narrative effect. Any similarities to real individuals or locations are coincidental, but the heart of it is real. My name is Robert Chen. That winter, I had just turned 62. I'm 69 now, sharing this with the kind of perspective I didn't possess back then. For most of my life, I was convinced I had done right by my daughter. I worked tirelessly, made sure bills were paid, never missed a recital or a graduation ceremony. I believed that was what being a good father meant. I believed love showed itself through duty and sacrifice. But sitting alone in that steakhouse on Christmas Eve, I came face to face with a harder truth. Providing for someone doesn't guarantee they'll want you present in their life. Sometimes all your responsibility and effort mean very little if your presence itself feels unwanted. The name of that restaurant was the Rustic Table. It was one of those elegant spots that keeps its doors open on holidays for the people who don't have anywhere else to be. When I stepped inside by myself, the hostess gave me a look filled with quiet sympathy. She placed me at a window table, tucked away from the clusters of laughing families, as if she sensed I didn't need a front row seat to anyone else's joy. I ordered a ribeye and a glass of red wine. I'm sure the steak was cooked perfectly. I couldn't taste anything. My mind kept replaying my daughter's voice from 4 days earlier, the way she'd softened it, almost whispering, like she was worried Michael might overhear her sounding too gentle with me. "Dad, don't come. Michael says it's too complicated." I had asked her what that even meant. Complicated in what way? For the 5 Christmases since her wedding, we'd celebrated together without incident. I never made waves. I showed up with presents, helped clear the table, got down on the floor to play with my grandson. I believed everything was fine. She hesitated before answering. "It's just with his parents coming this year, and the house being small, and after what happened at Thanksgiving." What happened at Thanksgiving was that I'd calmly disagreed with Michael about politics over dinner. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't been disrespectful. I'd simply said I saw it differently, and then shifted the conversation. Still, he'd turned distant the rest of the night, and I heard my daughter apologize to him at least 3 times, likely more when I wasn't within earshot. "Sarah," I'd said gently, choosing my words with care, "I'm your father. I haven't seen you since October. I just want to spend Christmas with my family." The silence that followed stretched long enough for me to hear Michael in the background, sharp and impatient, asking who she was talking to. "I'm sorry, Dad. Maybe next year." Maybe next year, as if I were a subscription she wasn't sure she wanted to renew. And so on Christmas Eve, at 62, divorced for 15 years, I sat alone in a restaurant full of strangers, trying to understand how I had become so utterly optional to the very people I'd centered my entire life around. That was the moment Harold Gibson approached my table. He was a tall black man with silver threaded through his hair and warmth in his eyes, wearing a cardigan that looked like it had been knitted by hand. A few steps behind him stood his wife, Margaret, petite, poised, her expression thoughtful in a way I couldn't quite interpret. "Excuse me," Harold said gently, I couldn't help but notice you're spending the evening alone. We have a table set for 4, but it's only the 2 of us. Would you care to join us?" My first instinct was to decline. Everything in me urged restraint, to guard my solitude, to carry my disappointment the way men my age were raised to carry it, silently, neatly, without letting it spill into anyone else's evening. But there was something in Harold's eyes that made me pause. There was no trace of sympathy or charity, just acknowledgement. One solitary soul recognizing another. "I don't want to impose," I replied. "You wouldn't be imposing at all," Margaret said, stepping closer. Her voice was rich and southern, smooth as honey poured over gravel. "We'd truly love the company. Our kids are scattered across the country this year. It's just the 2 of us, and far more food than we can manage." I glanced down at my half-finished steak, then at the empty chairs surrounding my table. Everywhere else, families leaned in toward one another, laughing, sharing stories, and in that moment, I chose differently than I usually would. "All right," I said. "Thank you, I'd really appreciate that." That first dinner with Harold and Margaret Gibson stretched into 3 full hours. Conversation came easily, covering everything from careers to grandchildren, to the strange adjustments retirement brings. Harold had spent 3 decades as a high school principal before stepping away from the job. Margaret had built her life in nursing, later teaching the next generation of nurses. They had 3 grown children and 7 grandchildren living in California, Georgia, and Maine. "The holidays used to be wonderfully chaotic," Margaret said with a soft laugh. "Now they're quieter. We're still learning what quiet feels like." Somewhere between the main course and dessert, I found myself telling them about Sarah, about Michael, about the phone call 4 days earlier. I hadn't intended to open up so much to people I'd only just met, but there was something about their steady attention that made honesty feel natural. "That's difficult," Harold said, his voice calm and grounded. He didn't rush in with solutions or platitudes. He simply let the weight of it sit there, acknowledged. He didn't try to solve it. He didn't minimize it. He simply recognized that it hurt, and somehow that quiet acknowledgement was exactly what I'd been starving for. When the bill arrived, Harold reached for it without hesitation. I protested, but he waved me off. "Call it a Christmas present," he said with an easy smile. Then he looked at me thoughtfully. "Robert, if you're free next Sunday, Margaret makes the finest pot roast in Denver. We'd be honored to have you join us." I nearly declined. I almost slipped back into the safety of distance, into the familiar habit of keeping my world small and controlled. But Margaret was already scribbling their address onto a napkin, and Harold was clasping my hand with the warmth of someone who'd known me for years instead of a single evening. 6 o'clock, Margaret said brightly. "And don't you dare bring anything but yourself." I folded the napkin carefully and tucked it into my wallet. Driving home through the snow-covered streets of Denver, I felt something stirring that had been absent for a long time: hope. That first Sunday dinner at the Gibsons' house marked the start of something far bigger than I could have imagined. Their home, a 2-story craftsman in Park Hill, was warm and inviting, every corner lined with bookshelves, framed photographs, and the comforting aroma of a slow-cooked meal drifting from the kitchen. Harold answered the door with a grin and immediately handed me a stack of plates. "You can help me set the table," he said, as if it were already understood that I belonged there. "Margaret has very particular standards about how this table is arranged," he murmured to me like we were co-conspirators. 43 years of marriage, and I still don't always get it right. Margaret's voice floated in from the kitchen as she stepped into the room, drying her hands on her apron. "I heard that, Harold Gibson, and you don't get it wrong, you just get it your own way." She shot me a playful wink. "Welcome, Robert. Please feel at home." That night I was introduced to their youngest son, David, who lived in Denver with his wife Lisa and their 2 kids. The grandchildren, 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Marcus, quickly decided I was their newest captive audience. Within minutes, I was being shown crayon masterpieces and given detailed explanations of imaginary adventures. Before we even sat down to eat, I knew everything about Emma's deep fascination with dinosaurs and Marcus's unwavering plan to grow up to be both an astronaut and a firefighter simultaneously. "Don't discourage him," David said with a laugh. "He's already drawn up blueprints for a spacesuit that comes with a built-in fire hose." And when we finally gathered around the table, I discovered Harold hadn't exaggerated in the slightest. The pot roast was every bit as incredible as he'd claimed. Yet the thing that stayed with me wasn't the meal. It was the atmosphere around that table. Conversations overlapped, but not with annoyance, with warmth. Laughter cut through stories. No one competed to be heard. They simply folded into one another's sentences. In the quieter pauses, Harold would reach for Margaret's hand without even looking, like it was the most natural reflex in the world. David and Lisa moved in sync, clearing plates and refilling glasses wordlessly, a practiced partnership, and the children weren't pushed aside or told to hush. They were woven into the discussion, their thoughts treated as worthy contributions. This, I realized, was what a family was meant to feel like. This was the kind of closeness I had always hoped to build with Sarah. When it was time to leave, Margaret wrapped me in a hug at the front door and said words that echoed in my mind long after I drove away. "Same time next Sunday, Robert. And every Sunday after that, if you'd like." "I'd like," I answered. 3 months slipped by, then 6, then an entire year. Sunday dinners at the Gibson house became the steady center of my world, the point everything else quietly circled around. Before long, I was showing up ahead of schedule, helping Harold fix loose hinges and patch small things around the house. I showed Marcus the basics of chess, watched his brow furrow in concentration as he plotted his moves. I guided Emma through her science fair experiment on volcanic eruptions, which left us both dusted in baking soda and food coloring. Margaret liked to say I had a gift with her garden, though I had a feeling she was simply generous with her praise. That entire first year, I didn't hear a word from Sarah, not on my birthday, not on Father's Day, not even when Christmas came around again. I mailed cards and sent presents for my grandson Ethan's birthday, receiving nothing more than a short text thanking me. I tried calling twice. Both times Sarah said she was swamped and would return the call later. She never did. The quiet ached. It still does, every single day. But the ache had changed. It no longer stood alone. It existed beside something unexpected: belonging, community. The Gibsons weren't a substitute for my daughter. That space in my heart couldn't be filled by anyone else. But they were showing me something I hadn't understood before. I didn't have to prove my worth to be included. I didn't have to earn my place at their table. I mattered to them simply because I was there. Then one Sunday evening, about 14 months after that lonely Christmas Eve, I walked into the Gibson house and found Margaret standing by the stove alone, quietly crying as she stirred a pot of soup. "Margaret," I asked gently, "what's wrong?" She startled slightly, then hurried to brush the tears from her cheeks. "Oh, Robert, I didn't hear you come in. It's nothing. I'm just being silly." "It's not nothing if it's bringing you to tears." She paused at that. Slowly she set the spoon aside and rested her weight against the counter. At that moment she seemed far older than 68. "My sister passed away this morning," she said quietly. "We haven't spoken in 11 years. The details surfaced gradually. After their mother died, Margaret and her younger sister Dorothy had argued over the estate. Words were said that couldn't be unsaid. Accusations turned into distance, and distance hardened into silence. Over the years Margaret had tried to reach out, but Dorothy never answered. And now Margaret whispered, her voice breaking, "There's no more time. She's gone. And all I can think about are the things I never said, the ways I could have handled it differently." I stood there in the warmth of that kitchen, watching this gracious, generous woman carry the weight of regret. Not only had she lost her sister, she had lost any chance to mend what was broken between them. And standing there, I felt something inside me shift. "I'm so sorry, Margaret." She met my gaze, her eyes sharp even through the tears. "Don't let that be your story, Robert. Whatever stands between you and your daughter, don't allow it to stay shattered until there's no time left to fix it. Pride isn't worth it. Needing to be right isn't worth it. Time slips away, and when it does, regret is all that's left." Her words lingered with me long after that night. I carried them when I drove past the card shop and nearly stopped to pick something out for Sarah. I heard them again when Ethan's birthday came, and I mailed a present that was never mentioned. They echoed on Father's Day, when the silence stretched on unbroken. Still, I didn't call. The sting of rejection was too raw. The thought of hearing once more that I was too complicated left me frozen in place. Then exactly 2 years after that lonely Christmas Eve, my phone rang on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. It was Sarah. Dad. Her voice sounded different, fragile, stripped of the confidence I used to hear so easily in it. Can we talk? My grip tightened around the phone until my knuckles ached. Of course, I'm here. She exhaled shakily. Michael and I were having some issues. The words tumbled out quickly, as if she'd rehearsed them. There are financial problems. The business hasn't been doing well. We fell behind on payments, and now there's this debt we have to clear before the bank. Before her voice trailed off, I waited, pulse hammering in my ears, hoping for something more. An apology. A moment of reflection. Some acknowledgement of the silence between us. Dad, I need $60,000. She rushed it out. I know that's a lot, but you have your retirement savings. And Michael says if we can just get through this quarter, everything will stabilize. Michael says. Sarah, I replied carefully. When was the last time we spoke before today? There was a long pause. I'm not sure. I'm trying to remember too, I said quietly. Was it Christmas you told me not to come? No, wait. You sent a text in January after that. Happy New Year. 3 words. Was that it? The silence that followed felt heavier than anything she'd said. 2 years, Sarah. 2 years without a conversation. And now you're calling because you need $60,000. That's not fair, she snapped, her tone tightening. You know things have been complicated with Michael and his family. Yes, I said evenly. I'm aware. He has opinions about me. She didn't respond. I'm too complicated, I continued. Too different, too something. I've been whatever he needed me to be for 2 years, Sarah, I said quietly. I've stayed out of the way. I've kept silent. I've made myself invisible. And now that you need money, suddenly I matter again. I'm your daughter, she sobbed. Doesn't that count for anything? The question landed hard, like a punch to the chest. Of course it counted. It counted more than anything. She was my only child. I had loved her for 39 years through scraped knees and teenage arguments and wedding vows. Loving her has been the most constant thing in my life. But she was also the one who had chosen her husband's comfort over her father's presence. The one who had let 24 months pass without a single real conversation. The one calling now, not out of longing, but out of need. Sarah, I said gently, I love you. I always have. But I can't give you $60,000. Why not? You have it. I know you do. Because money won't repair what's actually broken, I answered. Because if I solve this, there will be another emergency next year, and another after that, and I'll become the safety net for Michael's decisions until my retirement is gone. Because in 2 years you haven't once asked how I'm doing, and you're not asking now. So that's it, she shot back. You're choosing money over your own daughter? Her voice had hardened, sharp with accusation. Is that who you are now? Is that the kind of father you've become? No, I replied, steady even though my hands were shaking. I'm the kind of father who finally understands that loving someone doesn't mean allowing yourself to be used. I'm the kind of man who has people in his life now who show up on Sundays because they want to share a meal, not because they're looking for something. I'm choosing that, Sarah. I'm choosing to be appreciated, not just necessary. Silence stretched between us. When she spoke again, her tone was cool, deliberate. You know what, Dad? Michael was right about you. He always said that underneath the nice guy act, you're selfish. I defended you for years. I won't do that anymore. Don't call me. Don't text me. As far as I'm concerned, you've made your decision. The call disconnected. I remained standing in my apartment, phone still pressed to my ear, bracing myself for the wave to crash. It came. But tangled in the grief was something I hadn't anticipated. Relief. For the first time, I had stopped performing. I had spoken plainly, and in response my daughter had revealed exactly who she was, or maybe who she'd been all along, while I refused to acknowledge it. That night, even though it wasn't Sunday, I drove to the Gibson house. Harold opened the door, studied my face for half a second, and stepped aside. Come in, Robert. Margaret's putting the kettle on. I told them everything. The call, the request for money, the accusation, the final sharp click when she hung up. As always, they listened without cutting in, without rushing to fill the silence. When I finished, Margaret reached across and wrapped her hand around mine. "You did the right thing," she said with certainty. "Setting boundaries isn't the same as walking away. Don't confuse the two." "It doesn't feel right," I admitted. "It feels like I just lost my daughter." "You didn't lose her today," Harold said softly. "You lost her gradually, piece by piece. Today you simply stopped pretending you hadn't." He was right. I had been losing Sarah for years, maybe longer than I wanted to admit. Every time I brushed off Michael's dismissiveness, every time I tolerated being sidelined, every time I convinced myself that if I just gave a little more, demanded a little less, things would return to what they once were. I had been shrinking to fit into the margins of her life, and she had let me fade without ever asking me to remain. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. "You keep going," Margaret replied. "You keep coming on Sundays. You allow us to care about you, and you trust that the rest will unfold the way it's meant to." 5 years have gone by since that conversation. 5 years without a single word from Sarah. No birthday wishes. No holiday greetings. No pictures of Ethan, who has grown older without knowing the man who would have loved being his grandfather. I kept up with her life the way outsiders do, through scattered updates passed along by mutual friends, through social media posts I occasionally glanced at before forcing myself to stop. From what I gathered, she and Michael had somehow resolved their financial mess. Though I never discovered how, they upgraded to a larger house in the suburbs. Ethan moved on to middle school. Their world kept turning, neatly rearranged to exclude me, but mine kept moving too. I stepped away from my engineering career and began volunteering at a nearby community center, showing seniors how to navigate email and video calls. Somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like a guest in the Gibson household and started feeling like family. I was there for birthdays, holidays, every single Sunday dinner without exception. Emma entered high school and still sought me out for help with her science assignments. Marcus developed a passion for cooking and claimed his grandmother as his partner in culinary experiments. The two of them concocted increasingly ambitious recipes while Harold and I acted dramatically concerned about being their taste testers. I wasn't happy in a fragile, desperate way anymore. It wasn't the relief of someone who had barely escaped isolation. It was steadier than that, deeper. The kind of contentment that comes from knowing exactly where you fit. Then the phone rang, and everything shifted again. It was a Thursday morning in March. I was at the community center, helping a 74-year-old woman named Dorothy set up a video call with her grandchildren, when my cell buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Robert Chen. The voice was male, measured, professional. "Yes, this is Robert. This is Dr. Williams calling from St. Mary's Hospital. Your daughter Sarah Chen Mitchell is here. She listed you as her emergency contact. There's been an accident." The drive to the hospital should have taken 45 minutes. It felt like 45 hours. I phoned Harold from the car. He didn't hesitate. He said he and Margaret would meet me there. I told him that wasn't necessary. "Robert," he replied firmly, "don't be absurd. We're on our way." Sarah was in the ICU by the time I got there. A drunk driver had run a red light. The doctors explained it in calm, clinical tones. She was stable, but the injuries were serious. A shattered pelvis, multiple broken ribs, internal bleeding that had required emergency surgery. Michael was at the hospital, but he stepped out just as I arrived. We crossed paths in the corridor, our eyes meeting for a brief second before sliding away. No words were exchanged. Ethan was in the waiting area. He was 12 now, taller, thinner, his face caught somewhere between boyhood and adolescence. He looked at me cautiously, like he was flipping through a half-remembered photograph in his mind. "Grandpa?" he said, uncertain. "Hey, buddy." I sat beside him, leaving just enough space so he wouldn't feel crowded. "I'm here. Mom mentioned you sometimes," he said, staring down at his phone. "She said you were busy. That's why you didn't come around." The words hung there. I almost corrected him, almost told him the truth. But what would that accomplish? He was 12, and his mother was lying in intensive care. He didn't need the history of adult failures. He needed steadiness. "I'm not busy anymore," I said quietly. "I'm right here." About 20 minutes later, Harold and Margaret walked in. Margaret immediately shifted into action. finding more comfortable chairs, tracking down the cafeteria, making sure Ethan had something warm to eat. Harold sat next to me, saying little, just offering the weight of his presence. "You really didn't have to come," I murmured again. "Robert." He rested a firm hand on my shoulder. "When are you going to learn? This is what family does. The family you choose shows up, especially when it's difficult." The weeks that followed blurred together. Sarah's recovery was slow and complicated. Physical therapy, follow-up procedures, pain management. Michael, it turned out, had work obligations that required travel, and he couldn't step away. His parents were in Florida, elderly and unable to assist, so the responsibility of caring for Sarah during her healing process fell to me, the father she had removed from her life 7 years earlier. I moved into their guest room without hesitation. I drove Sarah to physical therapy, helped her in and out of the car, and learned how to brace her weight without hurting her. I cooked dinners, washed laundry, kept the house in order, and made sure Ethan got to school and soccer practice on time. I stepped into the role I had always longed to fill. Steady, present, dependable. All the while Sarah watched me with a look I couldn't quite decipher. 3 weeks after I moved in, she called out to me late one night, "Dad, can you come here?" I went to her room and found her sitting upright in bed, her face pale in the dim hallway light spilling through the doorway. It was clear she had been crying. "I can't sleep," she admitted. "I keep hearing the crash, the sound of it. I really thought I was going to die, Dad. I was sure that was it." I lowered myself into the chair beside her bed, the same chair where I'd been sitting each night before turning in, just to make sure she was settled. "You're safe now," I said gently. "You're going to recover." "That's not what I mean," she inhaled shakily. "When I was in the ambulance, when I thought I might not make it, do you know what I thought about?" I shook my head. "You." Her voice broke. "I thought about the last thing I ever said to you. Don't call me. As far as I'm concerned, you've made your choice. 7 years ago, Dad, I thought those were going to be my final words to my father." Her shoulders began to shake, and for a moment I felt helpless. I had rehearsed this scene in my mind countless times over the years, imagining what I would say if she ever came back with regret. But now that it was real, every prepared sentence vanished. "I was so wrong," she whispered, "about everything. Michael kept telling me you were selfish, that you only cared about money, that you were trying to control me. And I believed him because it was easier than admitting that I had pushed you away, that I had let him push you away, that I didn't have the courage to stand up for you when it mattered." "Sarah, please," she said softly. "Let me finish." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "For the last 3 weeks you've been here every single day." "Every day," she repeated. "Michael's called maybe 4 times. His parents sent flowers. And you, the father I told to disappear. You moved into my house and took care of me and Ethan without complaining once. You never asked for anything. You never tried to make me feel ashamed." "You're my daughter," I said quietly. "That's what fathers do." She shook her head, emotion flashing across her face. "No, that's what good fathers do. That's what you do." And I gave that up. I chose a man who couldn't even come home when his wife nearly died. Silence settled between us. Somewhere outside, a dog barked, life in the neighborhood continuing as if nothing monumental had shifted inside that room. "I want to meet them," Sarah said at last. "Meet who?" "The people who've been your family while I was too blind to appreciate you. Harold and Margaret. Sometimes you talk about them when you think I'm asleep. You call them every night. They were there for you when I wasn't." My throat tightened. "You'd really want that?" "I want to thank them," she said softly, "for looking after my father, for stepping into the space I abandoned." The first Sunday Sarah joined us for dinner came 2 months later. She was strong enough to leave the house by then, and I drove her to the Gibsons' place with my pulse racing. I worried the 2 worlds I cared about most might not blend. What if Harold and Margaret held resentment? What if the fracture between past and present couldn't be bridged? I needn't have feared. Margaret opened the door, saw Sarah standing uncertainly behind me, and immediately wrapped her in a warm embrace. "You must be Sarah," she said, smiling. "We've been hoping you'd come." "Come in," Margaret said warmly. "I made your father's favorite lasagna." The beginning of the evening carried a trace of stiffness. Sarah was reserved, almost overwhelmed by the easy affection of this family who had offered me everything she once withheld. But it didn't take long for that tension to soften. Emma, 16 now, and boldly unfiltered, asked Sarah about her work as a graphic designer. Marcus, 14 and deeply invested in anything creative, immediately wanted to see her portfolio. Within an hour, Sarah was smiling. By dinner, she was laughing at Harold's famously terrible jokes and standing beside Margaret in the kitchen, drying dishes as if she'd always belonged there. As we prepared to leave, Sarah gently pulled Margaret aside. I pretended not to watch, but I saw Sarah's eyes fill. I saw Margaret wrap her in a long, steady embrace. On the drive home, Sarah stared out the window for a while before finally speaking. "I get it now." "Get what?" I asked. "Why did you keep going back every Sunday? Why did you choose them?" She paused. "They don't expect anything from you. They're not measuring what you can provide. They just want you there. I didn't know how to offer that before, but I want to learn." I didn't trust my voice, so I simply reached over and squeezed her hand. 6 months later, Sarah filed for divorce. It was painful, complicated, and costly, but she came through it stronger, clearer. She and Ethan moved into a smaller house closer to Denver, closer to me, closer to the Gibsons. Now Sunday dinners require a few more chairs. Sarah usually brings a salad. Ethan debates basketball statistics with Marcus like it's a professional sport. Michael has faded into the background of our lives, a lesson none of us feel the need to revisit. And I sit at that full table, surrounded by the family I chose, and the family who chose me again. And I feel something I didn't realize had been missing all those years: wholeness. Last Christmas Eve, 7 years after that solitary meal at the rustic table, I stood in Harold and Margaret's living room, wine glass in hand, watching 3 generations, blood and chosen alike, laughing together in the same warm glow. Sarah caught my eye across the room and raised her glass. "Hey, Dad." "Yeah, thanks for not giving up on me. Even when I gave you every reason to." I thought about everything we had survived: the rejection, the silence, the call asking for money, the accident that finally broke through the walls she'd built, and the slow, careful work of rebuilding what we had almost lost forever. "That's what fathers do," I told her. "The good ones, anyway." Margaret, listening from the kitchen doorway, smiled softly. "That's what family does," she said. "All of us. If you're watching this and you're struggling with family, whether it's the one you were born into or the one you're trying to build, hear this clearly: it's not too late. It's not too late to set a boundary. It's not too late to reach out. It's not too late to accept an unexpected invitation from someone who sees value in you when you can't see it yourself. Family isn't an obligation. It isn't blood. It isn't shared history alone. Family is a choice. It's choosing to show up every day. Not because you're forced to, but because you want to. It's recognizing someone's worth even when they've forgotten it. Harold Gibson saw that in me one cold Christmas Eve, when I had nothing left. Because he chose to open his door to a stranger. I found everything I didn't know I was missing. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who might need hope tonight. And if you believe in second chances, redemption, and the quiet strength of rebuilding what's broken, subscribe to A Father's Wrath and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. We share powerful true stories about family, resilience, justice, and the courage it takes to choose love over bitterness. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, the greatest revenge isn't anger. It's building a life so full of meaning and love that the people who walked away finally understand what they gave up. I'll see you in the next story.